Today you will see this multi-species ecosystem go through strength and stride to raising these baby gecko eggs to having gorgeous new baby geckos. Don't forget to subscribe. Now this ecosystem goes all the way back to the end of April time. The reason I waited so long to add inhabitants in here was just because I wanted to make sure everything was 100% before I did so. The first things that I decided to add in here, which was on the previous video, was just a cleanup crew. This consisted of the springtails, isopods, shrimp, and also some snails for the water section. But what you're seeing at the moment is the tank just after a few days. The only difference really was that the water has started to become more clear, but the actual water itself was very, very orange due to all of the botanicals, the spiderwood, the cork bark pieces, everything else, and all the tannins that had leached into the water. The isopods though, they were doing really, really well. I was actually really worried that they'd end up actually drowning or they wouldn't do very well in this setup, but they actually thrived in here. What I always do on this channel, I always ask you, what should I keep in these paludariums? I always take your opinion, and every single one of you there actually kept saying morning geckos. So the first inhabitant I kept in the canopy was morning geckos. So what I did, I decided to go out and buy 2 morning gecko adults. These were actually already gravid. They both had an egg each already in the stomachs, and the way you can see that is you can literally see it through the stomachs. And it was only shortly after I started to see those eggs within this paludarium. The next thing I actually decided to get, and this was only myself who decided to get these, was the dwarf butterfly rainbow fish. Now these are absolutely stunning and they get more colourful with age, but they are juveniles at the moment, so I can't wait until these get more colour. The moss itself was just absolutely popping off, and everything within this setup was really coming to life. I also had a lot of suggestions regarding Malaysian trumpet snails, and I will be making sure I add these in. And Joshua Carter, I haven't forgotten what you said to me, and I will make sure I add them in here once I can actually source and find them. If you know anyone who supplies them within the UK, then please let me know in the comments below. And yes, that's right, we have 4 morning gecko eggs on this leaf, an additional 2 towards the back, so that means 6 brand new potential babies within this enclosure. It's a really nice feeling, especially when I've just been feeding them consistently, fruit flies, different baby crickets, all sorts of foods just to make sure that they're up to health. And then all of these eggs are just a sign that every single thing that I'm doing is finally paying off. You can actually see one of the adults just chilling on that canopy. What I decided to do was actually add clover within here. The reason I did that is because the clover produces runners as opposed to rhizomes. Rhizomes typically go underneath the soil and produce new shoots, whereas a runner sort of skips along the surface of it. This way it's a lot easier for me to maintain it and cut it down. The clover itself also produces beautiful little white flowers, which I think will look really nice in this paludarium, especially how it produces them all year round. And I will be showing those a little bit later. Maintenance time though, whenever I cut this tank down, I always make sure that I replant any cuttings or trimmings that I use. This is just so I can actually keep a nice dense bush within the canopy and below near that water section. Feeding the fish, feeding the geckos, and getting all that nice food for every single thing within here. A little bit more water in that gecko feed and jobs are good. But the next inhabitant that went in here added a few problems within this ecosystem. These were dwarf African frogs, and at first I thought they'd be a great addition in this setup, and believe me, they weren't. Now don't be lured in by their super cute tendencies, because these dwarf African frogs were super aggressive. What they started to do was go for the shrimp and trying to eat them constantly. Now luckily these shrimp are lightning fast, and even in slow motion here, they actually managed to get out the way. So this meant I had to take precautionary action and take these frogs out straight away. I did end up buying 3 of them, and they went into one of my other ecosystems, which I will update in the near future. Those 4 gecko eggs on the leaf really were coming along with leaps and bounds. The difficulty I had is that leaf started to decompose, so the ones on the left started to fall off the leaf. But the water section needed new inhabitants, and again, all of you beautiful people kept telling me to get vampire crabs. These are actually rainbow vampire crabs. The awesome thing about these is some of them have orange eyes, some of them have yellow eyes, and they are just so fascinating. I got a total of 5 rainbow vampire crabs, and these just absolutely loved it in here. Straight away they went into that water section, they started to explore, as well as climb the branches, all of that different detail that I'd added in there, and that's when all of my hard work really started to pay off as well, because I noticed that they were using the branches, the spiderwood, everything, the different levels of the platform, which I added in. It had 3 different levels in total, and they were using every single one of them. And just a quick prompt now, if you are enjoying the video so far, please don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more ecosystems and more updates on this channel. And typically, as soon as I'd added them in, they started eating my favourite thing in here, which was all those different types of mosses. But for me, it was just really nice to see them happy and eating all of that moss. You can also see that they like to hang out in the flow or the current of the actual paludarium itself. I also found that they like to stick around the bottom level as well and forage all of those things within the bottom layer. But at this point, I'd added all of the inhabitants that I thought of so far, apart from those Malaysian trumpet snails. I will be adding those in the near future. I also love how they eat as well. They just rip things apart and just stuff it straight into the mouths, almost like a shovel that's constantly going, exactly like the cherry shrimp, which is really cool to see. Also, let me know in the comments below, what should we name this paludarium? I would love for us to actually have a name for the paludarium, and every time you ask me for an update on a certain paludarium, you can refer to it as XYZ paludarium. So what should we name this setup? This was around 50 days after the paludarium was built. You can see that the moss is just doing so well. The vampire crabs were really settling in within this actual paludarium. The fish just weren't bothered by the crabs at all, and the crabs weren't bothered by the fish. This for me was also a really good sign, because at least I know the crabs aren't trying to pinch the fish and kill them. I was starting to get extra growth from my jewel orchid, and at the same time that moss was really starting to grow nicely on that corkbark piece. The eggs themselves had started to hatch. The ones that were falling off that decomposing leaf had hatched first. So for me that was also less worrying, because finally they were starting to hatch. And here's some of those white flowers I explained earlier from those clover. We still had those 2 extra eggs at that back canopy to hatch, and the front 2 on the leaf as well. What I did after they'd hatched, I actually added them to that little moss patch there. It was just a little bit of extra calcium for those vampire crabs and anything else that needed them. I was also thinking of the isopods as well. And these front 2 eggs were so packed out, I knew they were going to hatch very soon. But let's take a look at those cherry shrimp, because they're just so cute. There's one of the babies within the canopy, and literally half an hour later of that first actual video that I took, you can see that those eggs had finally hatched. I do wish that I caught the footage, but as I was putting my daughter to bed, they'd hatched in the meantime. I did end up adding a couple of species of springtails within this setup. I do have those tropical white springtails. Those ones are a lot faster and a lot more prolific, but I also added those orange springtails, which are bilobella. They're a lot more docile and a lot easier for them to catch, which is why there's probably a lot less of them. But I thought that these babies will have a constant food source or constant snack available, and at the same time, they're just a really nice pop of colour to have it in the setup. I'm also trying to get these baby geckos as used to me as possible. Typically, morning geckos aren't very tame or aren't easy to tame, so I'm just getting them used to me as much as possible. You can also see how well these geckos blend within the environment. You could barely see that gecko there. If it wasn't on this leaf, you really couldn't see it. But because I don't use auto mist systems and everything else that people normally use, and if you look at the last video I actually posted, you'll see why the frogs are also so tame that I keep. This is because I'm in there every single day, making sure I do my part, getting to know them. This is because they're my pets. I want them to know me as much as possible, and I also at the same time just want to make sure that they're comfortable with me going in here. This is because I want them just getting used to me, trimming some plants down, feeding them, giving them more fruit flies and everything else. Just like the frogs, I want them to come to the glass and see me every time these doors open. And you can see after a few weeks, these really are just starting to get used to me. And this is the most magical thing for me about keeping animals. It's just seeing them go from such a wild actual animal, not being used to human interaction whatsoever, to literally almost becoming your best friend. Now, if you did like the video, don't forget to smash that like, hit subscribe if you want to see more updates on this channel. But as always from me, beautiful people, peace and love, I'm out.